Imagine that your family is drowning in debt, with no way out, only for a wealthy man to offer you a lifeline. But it comes at a devastating price. This young woman is faced with this difficult choice: to stay loyal to her husband or surrender herself for one night to erase their troubles. But what seems like a single sacrifice quickly turns into something far darker, because once you step into this world, there's no such thing as just once. At the start of the movie, we are introduced to Nina, who is a young, beautiful woman, shopping in the supermarket. She had carefully selected only the essentials that were within her budget. But despite this, the cashier soon tells her that her total was above her budget, and she is forced to return some of the items, something she did while feeling greatly embarrassed. This encounter sets her mood on a low, but her day soon gets even worse when she reaches outside as a passing car speeds through a puddle and sends a wave of dirty water splashing on her clothes to her frustration. The car eventually stops and a man named Sergey steps out to apologize to her. He even offered to compensate her for the mishap, but Nina is in no mood to accept his apologies, as she lashes out at him and eventually turns and walks away. Hoping for some comfort when she arrives home, Nina's problems only get worse as her husband, Alexander, tells her about the notice from the bank he found among the mails. It was regarding their overdue loan payments, and when he realizes that they are at risk of losing their apartment, he blames Nina for not reminding him of the impending deadline. Overwhelmed by the situation and all that's happened to her that day, Nina bursts into tears. This made Alexander realize that he had been harsh on her, and he apologizes and reassures her that he will surely find a way to settle the debt. But when Nina offers to help, Alexander reminds her of their arrangement that he is responsible for earning money, while her role is just to support him as his wife. With that, he turns the moment to a couple's times together. But even as she goes along with the moment, Nina's mind was preoccupied with their financial struggles. Meanwhile, we are fully introduced to Sergey and his family, as they also face their own troubles, but in a different way. As he sits down for breakfast with his family, his wife, Tamora, immediately starts to tell him how unfulfilled she feels with their marriage. She further tells him that she is frustrated by his frequent absences from home and his lack of attention to their family. But Sergey was already exhausted from the repeated arguments, and he no longer has the energy to defend himself, so he simply leaves the house to avoid further confrontation. The next day, Alexander, who is actually a university professor and specializes in Chinese language, is seen lecturing students. Nina was also his student alongside her friend, Laura, who frequently reminds her how fortunate she is to have a handsome and intelligent husband. She playfully inquires about Alexander's performance in bed, but Nina dismisses the questions, telling her that financial stability matters more to her than personal pleasure. And although Laura teases that it would take a long time for Nina to become wealthy, Nina tells her that she will remain hopeful, as she believes that one day, her Prince Charming will eventually come along and change her life. Days later, an opportunity soon arises when Alexander receives an invitation to serve as a translator in a business negotiation between a Chinese investor and a local bank. However, due to a scheduling conflict in the university, he asks Nina to take his place. Coincidentally, the bank they are working with is the same one from which they have taken out a loan. Alexander hopes that if Nina helps secure the deal, they might gain favor with the bank's chairperson and potentially ease their financial burden. Nina eventually agrees, but when she arrives at the bank, she is introduced to the chairperson, who is actually Sergey. He initially expresses displeasure at the change in personnel, but his assistant assures him that Nina is highly recommended for the job. And to ease off the tension, Nina apologizes to Sergey, but he only remains professional and instructs her to focus on doing her work properly. During the business meeting, Sergey takes the Chinese client to a casino, since he knows that the man is fond of roulette. To engage Nina, Sergey hands her $200 worth of chips, but she hesitates as she tells him that she is not skilled at gambling. But as they continue to talk, Sergey tells her about his personal story, how he had once escaped a financial crisis. He tells her that he had been drowning in debt several years ago, so he had made a desperate decision and placed all his remaining money on number 0 at a roulette table. And miraculously, the ball landed on 0, and this was what eventually saved him from his calamity. Feeling inspired by his story, Nina places her chips on number 0 as well, and to her astonishment, she wins. After this, Sergey warns her not to push her luck, but she is by now caught up in the excitement, and she proceeds to bet all her winnings again on number 0. This time, she loses everything. However, the Chinese client is entertained by her daring spirit, and this makes him more agreeable in the negotiations. Once the client leaves, Sergey invites Nina to join him for a game of bowling. Though she initially hesitates, Sergey urges her on and even patiently teaches her how to play, and she is overjoyed when she manages to hit the pins. Meanwhile, after quietly observing the two for some time, Sergey's assistant suggests that he should get to know Nina better. However, Sergey is skeptical, as he is unsure if she would accept such an invitation, but his assistant tells him that Nina seems genuinely interested in him. Convinced by his words, Sergey extends a dinner invitation to Nina, and the two eventually go to a luxurious restaurant, where they engage in deep conversation. Soon, the discussion takes a more personal turn, as Nina opens up about her family's financial struggles and the looming debt with the bank. And at that point, Sergey makes it clear that he does not wish to mix business with personal matters. However, when he later invites Nina to his hotel room, she feels deeply offended by the suggestion, as it appears that Sergey's assumption about her motives was a mistake, and the evening takes an awkward turn. So, Sergey immediately apologizes, admitting that he is not skilled in wooing women, as he even confesses that he likes Nina, and then offers to help her with the loan if she gives him what he wants. However, Nina firmly refuses his offer and leaves. Back home, she tells Alexander about the meeting and mentions that she won $7,000 from roulette, but that she had chosen to gamble with it again. On hearing this, Alexander is furious, as he believes that the money could have been of immense help to them. Nina is left frustrated by his remarks, and she sarcastically tells him that maybe she should have accepted Sergey's offer to sleep with him. However, Alexander plays her words off as he continues ranting about the lost money. The next day, Nina confides in her friend Laura, as she tells her how Sergey had offered her a way to resolve her financial struggles. Laura playfully suggests that he might be the Prince Charming Nina had been waiting for, but Nina dismisses the idea as she vows her commitment to Alexander. At that moment, the women spot Alexander, who is working a second job as a tour guide for Chinese tourists. After seeing him, Nina feels embarrassed, and she immediately starts making plans on how to help with their financial struggles. Days later, Nina meets Alexander at school as she tells him that the bank has already filed a court case regarding their unpaid loan. Alexander was frustrated by the news, and he once again reminds her that she should have taken action when she had the chance. When Nina mentions that she still has the chairman's contact number, Alexander quickly urges her to call him. But Nina is disappointed at his suggestion as she angrily walks out on him. However, she spends the entire day contemplating Sergey's offer, and by evening, she finally decides to call him and agree to meet the next day. The following morning, Nina tells Alexander that she will be at the library with her phone turned off. But instead of the library, she heads to a hotel to meet Sergey. As soon as she arrives, Sergey contacts his workers and arranges for Alexander's loan to be put on hold for 3 months, with no interest at all. As the two eat, Nina tries to stay calm until Sergey reassures her that if she does not like him, she is free to leave, and he will not hold it against her. Touched by his kindness, Nina finally gives in, and they share an intimate moment together. Moments later, while feeling unexpectedly at ease, Nina sings happily and enjoys a drink with Sergey. However, reality soon sets in, as Nina realizes what she has done and immediately starts to get ready to return home. Upon arriving at their apartment, Alexander shares the good news about their loan, as he assumes that his visit to the bank the previous day had secured them the favor. But Nina appears distant, and when Alexander attempts to be intimate with her that night, she tells him that she is too tired. In the meantime, Sergey's wife notices a woman's perfume on him as he returns home. And when Sergey denies any wrongdoing, Tamora becomes furious and calls him names, and this, once again, makes Sergey leave the bedroom. He eventually calls Nina and asks her to meet him at the same hotel the next day. However, she declines and requests that he stop calling her. But even at this, Sergey tells her that he will wait for her regardless. The following day, Laura invites Nina for a girls' night out, but Nina declines the invitation. However, Alexander, who is listening to their chat, encourages her to go since the party is close by, and this makes Nina change her mind. But on her way there, Nina has a second thought and instead goes to the hotel, where Sergey is already waiting. That night, she surrenders to her lusts and spends the entire evening with him. And from that moment on, they agreed to meet at the hotel every Tuesday afternoon. Their arrangement continued until one Tuesday when Sergey's son fell ill, and he was forced to go to the hospital and stay by his wife. Throughout that day, it was impossible for Nina to reach him. This unexpected absence leaves Nina feeling downcast, as she realizes how much she has come to anticipate their secret meetings. Even on her birthday, Nina's mind was still on Sergey. Every time the phone rings, she runs from her seat, only to be disappointed. Her odd behavior was noticed by her husband, who became worried for her. In her quest to get answers to why he is avoiding her, Nina visits the bank with the hope of seeing Sergey, but he doesn't acknowledge her presence. But even at this, Nina continues to become obsessed with her Prince Charming, even when the fairy tale she thought was just beginning seems to be nearing its end. This realization sends Nina into depression, which makes Alexander take her to a doctor who prescribes some medications for her. And while she is down, Alexander continues to take care of her. Until one day, when he tries to be intimate, Nina can no longer hold back her guilt and eventually confesses that she had an affair. On hearing this, Alexander's tender care quickly turns into rage as he demands to know who the man is. When Nina refuses to answer, he lashes out, calling her names and ultimately telling her to leave their house. With nowhere to go, Nina calls Sergey in the middle of the night. And as he answers, Sergey's wife overhears the call and immediately suspects what was happening. When Sergey says nothing, it confirms her worst fears. Sergey then leaves to meet Nina, and in an attempt to ease her distress, he promises to buy her an apartment. True to his word, Sergey purchases a luxurious apartment for her. And Laura, who is delighted by Nina's change in fortune, celebrates her new life, believing her fairy tale has finally come true. Meanwhile, Alexander goes into depression as he turns to alcohol to drown his sorrows, and he even starts to frequently get into trouble. Days later, while Tamora serves the family meal, Sergei tells her how much he appreciates her. However, their peaceful meal is disrupted by a call from Nina, who has become increasingly obsessed with him. Their agreed-upon meetings on Tuesdays and Sundays no longer satisfy her, and she now demands to see him every day. Meanwhile, Sergei, who had initially been seeking only pleasure for Nina, soon began to see her as an inconvenience. So, to distance himself, he begins avoiding her at work. But Nina is relentless, and after days of being ignored, she finally manages to corner him. So, after talking for a while, she invites him to the theater with the hopes that they could rekindle their feelings for each other. But Sergei refuses her offer, as he tells her that they will see another time. But days passed, yet he never showed up. Then one evening, Nina hears a knock at her door. Expecting the visitor to be Sergei, she eagerly opens it, only to see that it was Alexander. It is obvious that he is yet to recover from her betrayal, as he enters the room and proceeds to assault her, claiming that she still belongs to him. Nina is left shaken by the experience, and she calls Sergei in the middle of the night to tell him what had happened. When he arrives, Sergei vows to deal with Alexander, but Nina tells him that she has something even more pressing to share. She tells him that she is pregnant, and that Sergei is the father. The news initially unsettles him, until he eventually gathers himself and assures her that he will provide all necessary financial support for the child. Although that isn't all she had expected to hear from him, Nina knows that she cannot force any commitment on him. And when Sergei returns home, his drunk wife confronts him once more. But this time, Sergei tells her everything that his mistress is carrying his child. This was the last stroll for Tamora, as she kisses Sergei one last time and bids him farewell. About that same time, around one corner of the street, we see that Alexander is ambushed by two men that Sergei had hired to handle him. Then days later, while we see that work has commenced at the construction site of a travel agency Sergei had purchased for Nina, Laura, who is now in a relationship with Alexander, tells him about Sergei's gift to Nina. She also informs him about Nina's pregnancy. However, she soon starts feeling remorseful for telling him, but Alexander acts as though he was indifferent and claims he is fine, although deep inside his heart burns with anger. One day, unable to contain his rage any longer, Alexander arms himself with a knife and seeks out the man who stole his wife. As he approaches Sergei, a bodyguard prepares to shoot, but Nina intervenes just in time. Knowing Alexander would never harm her, she pleads with him to drop the weapon and walk away, something that he reluctantly agrees to. The scenes then shift to years later, as we see that Sergei now lives with his new family, Nina and her newborn. But just like his previous marriage, his relationship with Nina has become distant and superficial. And in the same manner, we see that Nina's life also lacks the warmth she always craved. Then, several years later, we see that Alexander is now a successful professor, and as he attends a party, he unexpectedly runs into Nina and Sergei. And later that evening, while Nina approaches Alexander for a conversation, Sergei appears unbothered by their meeting. That is when he receives a call, and he tells Nina that he must leave for an urgent matter. Seizing the opportunity, Alexander confesses that he still loves Nina, and to his surprise, she casually suggests they rent a room together. And in an ironic twist of fate, we see that Sergei, who once had a secret romance with Nina, now prioritizes his original family, while Alexander has now become Nina's secret lover. However, Nina makes it clear to Alexander that this affair is purely physical, as she tells him that her heart has grown cold towards men. But as she leaves the hotel, tears stream down her face as reality dawns on her that the fairy tale ending she had once dreamed of was only a facade. And that's the story of the movie about love. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment for us. Until next time, stay safe.